reimburse certain local governments for lost property tax revenue and to be deposited in the state education fund to backfill the reduction in school district property tax revenue, transferring general fund money to the state public school fund and to a cash fund to also be used for the reimbursements, eliminating the cap on the amount of excess state revenues that may be used for the reimbursements for the 2023 property tax year, referring a ballot issue and making an appropriation. How does this fit under the single subject rule? We're doing concerning, the title was concerning a reduction of property taxes. There is just so much here. It's about reduction in property taxes, reduction in the Tabor refund, putting money into a school fund for education, eliminating the cap on the amount of excess state revenues that may be used for the reimbursements for the 2023 property tax revenue. Members, in the House, this bill has changed from when we passed it out of here. And we had quite a bit of debate on this bill before it passed out of here. But in the House, they passed 9 amendments in either appropriations or the House committee. They've passed another amendment on third reading. Maybe they passed 2 amendments on third reading. So that was just tonight, so new information tonight. So if you were keeping track of this, as this was trying to go through, like I was trying to keep track, you can't even keep up because they're passing amendments over there and you just can't even keep up. There was another amendment that I think was proposed. I don't know if it passed. Then there were like 19 amendments that were lost on seconds in the House. So we're talking about a lot of amendments, and now we're being asked just to concur. This is literally a bill that there was a press conference on 1 week ago today. Last Monday, there was a press conference at noon, said we're going to save people money, we're going to lower your property taxes, and then the bill wasn't out on the webpage till after 10:30 at night. And the next day, we were in appropriations as the committee of reference to hear I think at the time it was like a 58-page bill and about 25 pages of a fiscal note. And you remember we were all here on Monday pretty late. And then we were expected to be in appropriations, committee of reference the next day, and had the opportunity to actually digest a bill that at that time I believe it was like 58 pages. It is now 64 pages. So we're trying to prepare for everything else that we're supposed to be dealing with on the floor. We're talking about land use bills, other major bills. I mean, think of all the bills that have been flying through here that we were trying to have time to digest and do our job. I mean, we have to be held accountable in our areas, from our districts to the people of Colorado, that we've actually had time to maybe study these bills. But we just aren't getting it. I mean, we had a bill introduced, as you all know, 1311, which is a companion bill to this, on Friday. On Friday. Major tax policy. And as I stated before, when we talked about 1311, we couldn't even unlock the doors for the public to get in. And no fault to the chair of the Appropriations Committee, because he was trying to do everything he could to make sure that the public had the right to come in and talk about the bill. But it was Saturday.
Senator Kirkmeyer, can you please keep your comments to the motion at hand?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
So anyways, back to the bill 303. 1311 was a companion bill, is a companion bill to 303. So I was attempting to kind of show you how just the lack of public process here on major tax policy, how it relates to 303. So 303 is supposed to be a small property tax discount, or it was supposed to be a large, meaningful tax discount, but actually it's small. And the discount, it's not so much a discount. You're still going to pay increased property taxes this year by a lot. It's a small discount on an increase. So if you're thinking, Colorado, that you are going to, Coloradoans, that you are going to get a huge property tax relief, which is what you probably thought was being implied by this bill, you should probably think again. Because it's small. And when you take into account what's happening with your Tabor refund, you're getting nothing. You're going to lose your Tabor refund if you vote for Proposition HH, which is the ballot initiative that's coming forward with regard to 303. You'll lose your Tabor refund, and you'll still get an increase in property taxes. At least that's what I know about the bill as it left the House, as it left the Senate. And we're going to use those Tabor refunds that you aren't getting to ensure that the state education fund is fully funded. Or actually, it's the state public school fund gets additional dollars into it. Because what we heard on debate with regard to 303 was that we need the money for education. We need your Tabor refunds. We need to change the cap. We need to increase the revenue C cap, referendum C cap, up to now a new Proposition HH cap, which over a period of 10 years will bring into play about $10 billion that needs to go to education over the next 10 years, because we need to fund education. And as you've all heard me state, that's preposterous that we don't have the funding for education. We had this discussion during the School Finance Act, but it's preposterous to say that we need the money for education when we are sitting on over $4.6 billion in fund balances and reserves that can be used for education.
Senator Kirkmeyer, the motion on the table is concurrence with
Yes.
House amendments to Senate bills. Please keep your comments to that motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. So with regard to concurrence, I think before we can actually talk about how we are going to concur with Senate Bill 303 and what the House did, I think it's important that we understand what did the House actually do? What changes did they actually make with regard to 303? So one of the first bills One of the first amendments that came across that changed in the House was a J amendment, and that was in the House Committee of Reference, the Appropriations Committee. And in the J amendment, they struck lines, they were on page 61. On page 61, strike on line 1, they struck $207,000 and substituted $62,426. On page 61, line 5, they struck $207,717 and substituted $62,426. And on page 61, line 11, they struck $92,162,222 and substituted $94,162,222. So at some point, I'm going to go and find the fiscal note so that we can understand exactly what that did and the changes that are reliant upon that within the fiscal note and what that means to us with regard to the long bill and what we're doing. Then here was one of the first amendments that passed in the House. It was Amendment L045. Passed in the House committee. And it amended the re-engrossed bill, page 16. See if I can find it here. And this is going to be hard to do because now I'm looking at a re-revised bill instead of the re-engrossed bill. But on page 16, line 22, it struck the word "and." Are we getting the re-revised copies? Everyone? On page 16, line 22, we struck the word "and." I'm trying to figure out which bill this is in. It must be in the bill that came from the Senate. No, the amendments that are in the House Committee of Reference are on the bill that came from the Senate. So it's going to be really difficult to try and figure out here what they actually did. So, amended third reading in the House. Shading denotes House amendments. So in the House, starting on the title, they said that the general fund money would go to the state public school fund. That would be an amendment. And to a cash fund to also be reimbursed for the reimbursements, eliminating the cap on the amount of the excess state revenues, etc. The next changes that occurred in this bill, they're not on page 6, but if you remember on page 6, we had changes in dates that occurred there. They did not change those dates. Now I'm going to part 2 to see if they made any changes in part 2 from what I can figure out in the re-revised bill. On page 9, they made changes where they added in paragraph 3, subparagraph small q, subparagraph Roman numeral 3. They made the same change on page 10 on line 11. This is the section that has to do with the submission of the ballot issue and the voter-approved revenue change. And then you get to page 11, where it appears that they added in several lines. Starting on page 11, line 18, this is shaded, so I'm assuming that means that denotes a House amendment. So they either did this in the Appropriations Committee or the House Committee, well, that would have been Appropriations, excuse me, or they did it on seconds on the floor, or they may have done it on thirds tonight. And here's what it says. If there is any money remaining after the allocation set forth in subsection 3, small b, Roman numeral 1 of this section, the state treasurer shall transfer an amount equal to the remainder of 5% of the total amount in the account for the fiscal year, or $20 million, whichever amount is the least, to the Housing Development Grant Fund created in Section 24-32-721, Paragraph 1, to be used to reduce the amount of property taxes that are paid as a portion of a tenant's rent through a program established under subsection 2, small letter d, paren, Roman numeral 6 of said section, and then they renumbered Roman numeral 2 to be Roman numeral 3. So for those of you who don't have the bill yet in front of you, let me just kind of explain what section of the law we're in and how this is very similar to amendment that was here in the Senate that failed on a 17-17 vote. So this again is in the section. They made changes to this section. It's under 24-77-203. They made changes. And there's all of this section that talks about the changes in the valuations. But this is what happens with the Proposition HH General Fund Exempt Account that is created. So if you remember going back to when we heard this Tuesday or Wednesday or sometime in the last week, if you remember, we talked about that this is going to create, Proposition HH will create a general fund exempt account. And originally, the account is to consist of an amount equal to the amount of the state surplus that the state is authorized to retain. So again, they're authorized to retain the surplus. That would be the difference between the referendum C cap and the new proposed HH cap. So this account consists of an amount equal to the amount of the state surplus that the state is authorized to retain and spend under this part for the prior fiscal year. And then it goes on to say that the state treasurer shall credit all interest and income derived from the deposit and investment of money in the Proposition HH General Fund Exempt Account to the account. And the money in the account for each fiscal year, beginning with 23-24 fiscal year, must be used as follows. So originally, we only had 2 Roman numerals here. And we did have some discussion, so hopefully you remember this from when we had this discussion on the floor here. But originally, the first spillover of the money that's retained was to go to, and still does, go to, the money is first used to provide reimbursements to local governments under Section 39-3-210, paren 4, paren small a, Roman numeral 2. So the money is first going to spill over into, supposedly, providing reimbursements to local governments. Then they added a new item for which the excess funds, the amount of state surplus that the state is authorized to retain, first spillover goes to reimbursements, provide reimbursements for local governments. That's the first thing. Then they added, there's money remaining after the allocation set forth in 3B, Roman numeral 1, which is the local governments. The state treasurer shall transfer an amount equal to the remainder, 5% of the total amount in the account for the fiscal year, or $20 million. So this is a little bit different than the amendment that failed, that I referred to as the I Love Renters Amendment. Remember, we had an amendment, it failed here. You all did not vote for it. Well, not all of you, 17 members did not vote for it, and it failed. That amendment said that basically 5% of the total amount in the account would go to the Housing Development Grant Fund created in Section 24-32-721 paren 1. So the House, even though an amendment failed here, the House added a new place for the money to go. Thank you. The House added a new number, Roman numeral 2, a new place where the Proposition HH General Fund exempt account, where the state treasurer is to provide dollars to, in the amount of 5% of the total amount in the account for the fiscal year, are $20 million, whichever amount is the least, again, to the same place in that amendment that failed in the Senate that we're now being asked to concur with because it passed in the House. I think this is information you all would have probably have liked to heard about or been able to read or catch up on. So let me just say that again. An amendment, remember it was the I Love You Amendment, I Love You Renters Amendment. I Love Renters Amendment, I think is what I was calling it. It failed over here, and now you're being asked to concur with something that you didn't deem worthy of your vote. This is what I mean, members, by we need to know what's in this bill before we just go off haphazardly and concur. Now, for the people who voted for that amendment, the I Love Renters Amendment, you're probably thinking, great. I couldn't get it done in the Senate. The House did it. And now, blindly, we're just going to get everybody to concur with the House amendment that, again, an amount equal to the remainder of 5% or $20 million. So the House amendment's a little bit different because they put a cap on it. But I'm thinking maybe they just had to change the amendment just a little bit so that they could put their name on it, and so it wasn't identical to the amendment that I proposed. But here it is. So again, for those of you who did not vote for this amendment, please be aware that you are now asking to concur with something that you did not deem worthy of your vote just a few days prior. Then on page 12, we have to change Roman numeral 3 because it was Roman numeral 2, so we did some renumbering. And just keep in mind, this is the third pot that this money spills over into. So it goes to local governments first to provide reimbursements, and according now to the revised bill, it will go to the House's I Love Renters Amendment that looks awfully similar to an amendment I proposed that did not pass the Senate. And then there's the third area that has, again, there's some shaded area here, but this is essentially that the state treasurer shall transfer the amount, if any, in the account that is in excess of the amount that will be used in accordance with subsections 3B, Roman numeral I, and 3B, Roman numeral 2 of this section. This says to the state education fund. This says that it will transfer it to the state education fund that's created in section 17. And it says, further goes on to say about how the General Assembly hereby finds and declares that public school funding consists of a combination of state and local school district revenue. And the reason I'm reading this is because there's a change at the bottom of this page. So I want to make sure that we get it. that we understand how it fits in. So this starts on line 8. On page 12 is where I'm at. The General Assembly hereby finds and declares that A, that's small letter A in parens, public school funding consists of a combination of state and local school district revenue. B, under the current school finance formula, an increase in state funding can backfill a decrease in local property tax. That's important for us to all remember as you're going through this bill and you're looking at these changes. Under the current school finance formula, an increase in state funding can backfill a decrease in local property tax revenues. Reductions in property tax valuations. So remember, this is concerning a reduction in property taxes. Reductions in property tax valuations reduce the local property tax revenue collected for local governments, including schools. Money in the state education fund. So here's the connection back to the state education fund, where dollars are flowing into that on the third tier, essentially. Money in the state education fund is used to provide funding for local school districts, and here's where some of the changes come about, and it is the intent of the General Assembly that transferring a portion of the money from the account to the state education fund in accordance with subsection 3 of this section provides additional funding to local school districts in order to backfill property tax revenue reductions resulting from property tax changes. In this Senate bill, and we've got a little gap there, so I'm assuming they're going to add in 303. And here's a new change. Here's the amendment. It's on page 12. This was a House amendment. Page 12 starts on line 24. And let me just start at the beginning of the sentence again, so I'll read the whole sentence for you, and then we'll talk about what it means. It is the intent of the General Assembly that transferring a portion of the money from the account to the state education fund in accordance with subsection 3 of this section provides additional funding to local school districts in order to backfill property tax revenue reductions resulting from property tax changes enacted in this Senate Bill 23, again, I'm going to fill in the gap, 303, and that the money so transferred shall not supplant general fund appropriations made for school districts' total program as defined by section 22-54-103, paren 6. Isn't that amazing? That's actually probably a pretty darn good amendment. And I at least thought so, because that's very similar to an amendment that I tried to get onto the bill regarding a maintenance of effort level with regard to school funding, that the state could not reduce its share of general fund revenues, general fund, to our education program. Because you remember the whole problem that occurred. Everybody said, we can't do that. We can't have a maintenance of effort level because, gosh, then how would we do that BS factor? If you have a maintenance of effort level, how would we not have a budget stabilization factor, a BS factor, where we don't fully fund under our constitutional requirement? And this year our buy down was $321 million that we needed. And remember, the governor's request to begin with was let's just buy down $35 million. And so I had an amendment that said our state maintenance of effort level need it to remain, mostly because of what happened this year in the Long bill. While we reduced state general fund monies towards education, knowing that we had a $321 million requirement to buy down to fund our schools, we reduced our general fund monies by $158.5 million, while the local government district share increased by approximately, I think it was, I'm going to not get this quite right, but it was approximately $650 million. So an amendment that says that the money that is transferred, so the money from the Tabor refunds, Coloradoans, that you are not going to get. This is what this amendment is saying, and it's not necessarily a bad amendment, but just so we're clear why it's important that we're doing this, might be a point for us to concur, but again, I'm going to remind you that you all, this amendment did not pass in the Senate. So again, you are being asked to concur with an amendment on 303 in the House that you decided you should not vote for in the Senate. And it wasn't just once, that this maintenance of effort level, this maintenance of effort amendment came up. It came up in the Education Committee, got voted down there. It came up in the School Finance Act, got voted down there. It came up in 303, got voted down here. So the Senate said no. Yet you're being asked tonight to concur with the House, who said yes. So did we just not get it right? Did you all understand that that amendment was in there? That the money so transferred shall not supplant general fund appropriations made for school districts' total program, as defined by section 22-54-103, paren 6. I'm thinking the good senator from Arvada probably knows exactly which section that is and what title that is, but I'm thinking that must be somewhere in school finance. I don't really know for sure, but that's where it feels like it should be to me. So keep in mind in this section, this is the state surplus that the state is authorized to retain. First bucket goes to local governments to reimburse them. Of course, there are some provisions here as to whether or not they're going to get reimbursed. Second bucket goes to what the House is, I'm going to call the House's I Love Renters Amendment, that they had to change just a little bit and tweak just a little bit, so I couldn't say, well, that was my amendment, but I'm going to say that was my amendment. They changed it a little bit. Apparently, they don't love renters as much as I do, because it put a cap on it, $20 million. They had the 5%, and then they said, or $20 million. I did not have that in my amendment. So they don't love renters as much as we tried to say we loved renters. But again, you voted that down. That did not pass, yet you're being asked to concur with it. And now we have another amendment that the money so transferred shall not supplant. So this is money that is transferred from the state surplus that the state is authorized to retain if Proposition HH. So Coloradoans, that is your Tabor refunds that you will not be receiving. That is that approximately $10 billion over the next 10 years, that if you vote for Proposition HH, you will not be getting back into your pockets. So instead of you getting a check for $750, or this next one will be for $672, we're going to transfer that into the state education fund. And then, so that's your property tax revenues now going to education. Again, the state is sitting on $4.6 billion in fund balances and state reserves. So maybe that is why the Senate didn't think we needed to have a maintenance of effort level for the state. Kind of really doesn't make sense, does it? We're sitting on $4.6 billion of state reserves and fund balances that are supposed to be spent or can be spent on education. And an amendment that I attempted that the Senate said no. No, the state should not have to have a maintenance of effort level. Got changed a little bit to say that these monies cannot supplant general fund appropriations to school districts. This is the Amendment 23. We're finally realizing someplace, the House finally must have dawned on them someplace for this amendment to say that we're going to finally follow the will of the voters who put in our Constitution the increase to school districts' total program funding. And we're finally going to do that by ensuring that we take your Tabor refunds, because that's the only way we can make sure we get that done. So that's what this amendment is about. So I'm just going to remind you again. While we were attempting to try and get this done in the Senate said no. So you're being asked to concur with something that you did not agree with in the Education Committee, that you did not agree with during the School Finance Act, and that you did not agree with in the discussion on 303. This is why it's important that we go through this and we understand what we're voting on. Not only that, hopefully the public is watching and they'll understand what kind of tax policy that we're trying to pass down here. So then you get to page 13. And there's another change where apparently we're adding in paragraph 3, paren small b, paren Roman numeral 3, on line 15, so that it's clear that we're referring back to where the excess revenues go. And now we have a different change, though, because remember, these funds cannot be used to supplant general fund appropriations made for school districts. Now, that's not quite what I was going for, maintenance of effort level, but it's fairly close. So hopefully, as we're going through this, there'll be people that'll realize that we shouldn't be reducing the state's share, but there's no guarantees. Because we did a workaround on Amendment 23, which was a constitutional amendment. So it probably won't be difficult to find a workaround Proposition HH should it pass. But anyways, on page 13, we added in 3B, Roman numeral 3. And this is that section. So we had to make sure that we had the right number in here, because this is the section that says state education fund creation, transfers to fund, use of money in fund, permitted investments, exempt from spending limits. And it would be really bad if they didn't make the corresponding amendment here, and this still said 3B Roman numeral 2. Because remember, Roman numeral 2, 3B Roman numeral 2, is the I Love Renters, not quite as much as I Love the Renters Amendment, but the I Love Renters Amendment. So it's important that we change that up, because that would be huge if this amendment was not made. Because this says the fund consists of state education fund revenues and money transferred to the fund in accordance with Section 24-77-203, paren 3, paren small b, paren Roman numeral 3, which again is the money that is being transferred from the Proposition HH General Fund Exempt Fund, something like that. I could probably find it here in a little bit, but it's money that's being transferred from the account to the state education fund in order to backfill property tax revenue reductions resulting from property tax changes. So we're backfilling all the schools. And the reason that we are backfilling all the schools and then ensuring with the amendment and then ensuring that we make sure and have the right reference over in section 4, but we're backfilling schools so that we don't have to increase general fund revenues to education. So what this amendment is saying, that we're adding to section 4, we're making sure that we're getting the right reference in section 4, that we are going to make sure that we don't supplant general fund appropriations made for school districts, because we're going to take your Tabor refunds. That's what it means when it says state surplus that the state will be authorized to retain. That's what it means when you pass Proposition HH. We're going to take what would have been or should have been or could have been your refund, your Tabor refund, Coloradoans, and we are now going to put it in to education, but we are making darn sure that the state doesn't use that money to supplant general fund appropriations made for school districts' total program. I'm telling you, I've only been on the JBC 1 year, but I think I can figure out a workaround for that right now. I think I can figure that out right now. So again, even though we're trying here, this was an idea that was somewhat presented here that the Senate voted no on. Not once, not twice, but 3 different times, said no, and you're being asked to concur with it. So again, very important that we put, that they amended the bill in section 4, again, to make sure that the money was transferred in accordance with 3B3, Roman numeral 3, instead of 3B, Roman numeral 2. That would be a big trouble. That would be a big problem, because we would have been transferring the renter assistance into the education fund. And it's capped at $20 million. That would have been bad. That is not what they were trying to do. So again, we're transferring money. We're trying to say state, even though again, this is just a bill. It's just statute. Proposition HH is not constitutional, it's statutory. So voters, that means that the General Assembly can change things up. And again, if I'm sitting here thinking how I can make sure that we do supplant general fund appropriations through a joint budget, through the Joint Budget Committee and through the long bill, I'm thinking there are a couple people in this room that are smarter than me and been on the JBC longer than I have. I'll bet they can figure it out too. So there's no guarantees that your Tabor refunds are going to go to education. And there's really no reason that we're doing this to get your Tabor refunds for education, because the state is sitting on $4.6 billion of fund balances and state reserves. I don't know anyone who manages their house that way, their household that way. But apparently, we're going to try to get you to vote for it so that the state can do that. State can say, I need more money. It'd be like your kid asking for more allowance. You know, maybe they're getting, I don't know, $50 a month. I don't know what allowance is these days, but maybe they're getting $50 a month in allowance. And they've been saving up, and they're saving up, and they've put into their pocket. They've got in their bank, they've hid it under their bed, under their mattress someplace, $5,000. So they've got their own little reserve account sitting under their mattress of $5,000. And they come to you as your parent, as their parent, and say, I need more of your money. I just don't have enough money to go buy that new Xbox game. I just need more of your money. Mom, Dad, that $50 you're giving me per month is just not enough. You didn't account for inflation. I've been working harder. I'm older. I should get more money. And then they get more money, and they don't go spend it on an Xbox game. They go blow it at Dave & Buster's. What a waste. What a waste. But in the meantime, they didn't really need the more money to go buy the Xbox game because they had squirreled it away underneath their mattress. So like their own little reserves, their own little account balance there. That's what this is saying. Coloradoans, we want your excess funds, your Tabor refund. We don't think you should have it. We think we should get it so that we can continue our spending, preserve our level of spending, and do more spending, and grow government farther. Because we need your money for education when we're sitting on $4.6 billion of fund balances and reserves. All right, moving on to page 14. I don't see any shaded areas here, so they didn't make any changes to page 14. Because this is essentially section 5. This is essentially section 5, which speaks to the annual financial report and the certification of excess state revenues. So they didn't need to make any changes here. They didn't add any amendments here. So no worries. This section is just about what the state controller shall prepare a financial report. Apparently they didn't see any need for that, to make any changes there. So the state controller will still prepare a financial report for the state for purposes of asserting compliance with the provision of this article. And they didn't make any changes to this. The financial report shall be audited by the state auditor. That's good. Somebody needs to make sure that the state controller is doing what they're supposed to be doing, and it gets audited by the state auditor. So that would be good. Because that financial report that they didn't change will be prepared pursuant to this section, shall include but shall not be limited to the state fiscal year spending. Always good to know what your government is doing with spending. Those reports are a little dry and a little long and a little hard to read, but we didn't make any changes there. Nothing in here about how we should make the report easier for Coloradoans, for our taxpayers to understand, but we didn't make any changes in section 5. Then there's section 6. It's on page 14 as well. It starts on page 14. Limitation on property tax revenue, temporary property tax credit, governing body override, notice, and definitions. Okay, so they didn't make any changes to the definition for inflation. It still means the annual percentage change in the United States Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index for the Denver Aurora Lakewood, for all items paid by all urban consumers or its applicable successor index. They didn't make any changes to that. I'm on page 15, line 4, for those of you who are following along, because you want to make sure what you're voting on, because you were asked to concur to this. So they didn't make any changes to local government, which means a governmental entity authorized by law to impose ad valorem taxes on taxable property located within its territorial limits, except that the term excludes school districts. Sorry, that's really important. Local government excludes school districts, which is, I don't know if you actually ever read that in the original bill, but that's amazing. because now we have a new definition for local government that's a lot different than some of our other statutes. But they didn't make changes to this in the House. They didn't make changes to the property tax limit definition. That still means the limit established in subsection 2 of this section on a local government's property tax revenue for a property tax year. Property tax limit. They didn't make any changes to it. They didn't make any changes for the property tax years commencing on and after January 1st, 2023. A local government's property tax revenue for a property tax year shall not increase by more than inflation. So they did not make any changes to that. A local government's property tax revenue for a property tax year shall not increase by more than inflation from the local government's property tax revenue for the prior property tax year, unless the governing body of the local government approves the increase in accordance with the subsection 4 of this section. So apparently where we had discussion about this approving, the governing body just unilaterally approving the increase, and remember we had an amendment that said you had to go for voter approval. I don't know if they had one of those amendments over in the House, but if they did, it must not have passed because they did not make a change to the bill. So I suppose that's good news for some people, but for the good senator from Logan County in Peltonia, it's not good news to him because he thought that local governments should have to go to a vote of the people before they approve an increase. So didn't make any changes there. They didn't make any changes where they talk about the limit set forth in subsection 2A of this section. Probably because that goes back to the United States Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics. So they didn't make changes to that. They didn't make changes to the year that it's based on, December 15th, or the calendar year that is available as of December 15th. They did not make changes there. They didn't make changes for the purpose of calculating the property tax limit. I'm on page 16. Doesn't look like they made any changes to Roman numeral I. Property tax revenue from the increased valuation for the assessment within the taxing entity for the preceding year. So they didn't make changes there because it's as defined in the property tax administrator in the manuals prepared pursuant to yet a different law. So no changes there. So there weren't any mistakes made there. Doesn't appear that they made any changes to Roman numeral II. Property tax revenue from the increased valuation for assessment attributed to the change in law for a property tax classification or to the annexation or inclusion of additional land, the improvements thereon, and personal property connected therein within the taxing entity for the preceding year. So they didn't make any change there. I know I read that kind of quickly, but hopefully you're following along. So again, no changes in Roman numeral II on page 16. Doesn't appear they made any changes to Roman numeral III on page 16. Property tax revenue for property that had previously been omitted from the assessment roll. So these are properties that are excluded from the property tax revenue for the property tax year. Did not make changes there. Roman numeral IV. Property tax revenue abated or refunded by the local government during the property tax year. No change there. That still is excluded from the property tax revenue for the property tax year. Roman numeral V. Property tax revenue attributed to previously legally exempt federal property that becomes taxable if such property causes an increase in the level of services provided by the local government So that, no changes there in number 5. Again, so they're still excluded from property tax revenue for the property tax year. So that makes sense. It's legally exempt federal property. Of course you would exempt that. They pay payment in lieu of taxes in most cases. So that makes sense. Then there was Roman numeral 6. Any amount for the payment of excess incurred in the reappraisal of classes or subclasses ordered or conducted by the State Board of Equalization for the payment to the state of excess state equalization payments to school districts. Anyone ever noticed how we're really good at run-on sentences? Putting it in law? Yeah, just like that bill title. No changes. Good news. Bad news if you're a grammar, if you're a teacher, English teacher, and you look at grammar. But pretty hard to follow along on that one, but no changes, so that's good news. Then on page 17, we've got some changes. We've got some shaded area. So let me just kind of start at the top here because the changes, just so you can follow along. So this says, this is B. 3A was, for purposes of calculating the property tax limit, property tax revenue that is from the following sources or is used for the following purposes is excluded from property tax revenue for the property tax year. So that was A. And then we have B, which is, for purposes of calculating the property tax limit, property tax revenue that is from the following sources or is used for the following purposes is excluded from property tax revenue for the property tax year and the prior property tax year. So here we go. Roman numeral 1 has a shaded area. We must have taken out an and. So Roman numeral 1, so remember this is for purposes of calculating the property tax limit, property tax revenue that is from the following sources or is used for the following purposes is excluded from property tax revenue for the property tax year and the prior property tax year. And Roman numeral 1 is property tax revenue from producing mines or lands or leases or leasehold producing oil and gas. So they are excluded. They're excluded in the calculation of the property tax limit. And then we must have removed an and. And then in Roman numeral 2, we added in some information. So in Roman numeral 2, again, for purposes of calculating the property tax limit, property tax revenue that is from the following sources or is used for the following purposes is excluded from property tax revenue for the property tax year and the prior property tax year, an amount to provide for the payment of bonds and interest thereon, or for the payment of any other contractual obligation that has been approved by a majority of the local government's voters voting thereon at any election held before, on, or after November 7th, 2023. That was an amendment we added in. That was a good amendment. We protected people's bonds. Well, not people's, local government's bonding or any other contractual obligation that they had that their voters approved of. Okay, then we get to Roman numeral 3. And there are changes here from the House. Any revenue from a mill levy that has been approved by voters of the local government without limitation as to the rate or amount at any election held before, on, or after November 7th, 2023.
Senator Kirkmeyer, you
Yes,
have
sir.
been speaking for longer than 1 hour, and according to Rule 16A, each senator is limited to 1 hour at one time without consent of the Senate. So the motion before the body, the question before the body, is to provide consent for the senator to continue past her 1 hour. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no? No. The noes have it. Your hour has expired. The Senate will stand in a senatorial 5. The motion before the body is that the Senate concur with House amendments to Senate Bill 303. Are there any no votes? Senators Lundin, Gardner, Liston, Rich, Baisley, Will, Van Winkle, Simpson, Pelton R., Pelton B., Smallwood, Kirkmeyer. With a vote of 23 ayes, 12 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused, the motion is adopted. Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the repassage of Senate Bill 303.
The motion is the repassage of Senate Bill 303. Minority Leader Lundin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 303, a headlong rush into the destruction of the taxpayer Bill of Rights, holding as leverage over the people of Colorado the fact that property taxes are running away and will be taxing them out of their homes. 303 presents the proposition that the only way to solve this is to kill the taxpayer Bill of Rights. I disagree completely. There is an alternative pathway before us. We could call a special session and actually deal with the issue of runaway property taxes caused by the repeal of Gallagher. There were some of us who stood in the well when we released that to the people, and the people did vote for that, not necessarily completely understanding the consequence, voted against that, saying it would price people out of their homes. Earlier this session, a Republican senator, one from, we like to joke, North Peltonia, brought a bill, 1054, he was the Senate sponsor on it, that would have frozen the existing property tax rates for 2 years while we worked through a pathway out of this property tax crisis we are in today. It was rejected. It was rejected in pursuit of a pathway that could back the people of Colorado into a corner that would force them, in order to get a modicum, a sliver, a little bit of property tax relief, to give up much of, if not most of, immediately, the refunds due to them under the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and over the next several years to completely destroy, eliminate the value of tax returns to the people that is inherent in the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. So Senate Bill 303 is billed as, it was first billed as a tax cut, if you can believe it. Laughable. A small decrease in the increase of property taxes is not a tax cut. Well, that message went away fairly quickly because it was obvious that it was a laughable suggestion. Yet it remains a limitation on refunds due to the people under the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and not even more than a 50% reduction in the rate of increase that people are suffering on their property taxes. There are pathways out. Freezing would be a simple answer. Just pause the rates where they are. There is under consideration, and we're doing some development right now with the fiscal analysts here in the Legislative Counsel office, alternative ways of looking at this, where we could actually get a rate reduction for residential owners. The rate proposed in one analysis was 6.2%. That would be an 11% decrease in the current rate for homeowners, and a commensurate decrease for commercial or non-residential property. The math associated with that is challenging. It would require a small investment from the general fund. It would require a small investment, but far less than the giving away of, the consumption of, the killing of $10 billion in tax refunds to the people of Colorado over the next 10 years, which 303 takes from the people of Colorado. The challenge inherent in this bill is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights creates a line on a graph above which refunds are defined due to the people. Referendum C bent that curve up a little bit. Referendum HH, which this bill would refer to the people, bends the curve up even more, and that's what eliminates over time the Taxpayer Bill of Rights refunds due to people. But that's not the most offensive part of the bill. The most challenging and offensive part of this bill is it tells the people, you must, in many ways, vote against your own self-interest by passing through this Proposition HH if you have any desire, any hope of tax relief. That is an unacceptable answer. For the literary among us, it's Damocles' sword hanging over the taxpayer's head, saying, the sword will fall and cleave your head from your shoulders. Tax, that being, the metaphor being property taxes running away to the point that you can't afford. If you aren't willing to give up a substantial portion of your Taxpayer Bill of Rights refund in the current year and all of it over time. I have a limited amount of time here to talk through this, and so I won't go into the details of the other elements. I'm trying to figure out where I'm at on time. Another 15, 20 minutes?
Are you asking if you are over the 5 minutes that you agreed to? Or
Well, I guess that would be one way.
or under the 1 hour that's allowed in the rules?
Fair enough. Let me.
The answer is yes to both
Yeah, the answer,
questions.
so, fair enough. Let me just summarize by saying this. There is a pathway forward, a better pathway forward that I believe we all could come together on. And instead of moving through this bill, which is now 1 week old in its consideration through both chambers, 1 week we've had this bill. Not one Republican senator, not one Republican representative laid their eyes on this bill more than a week ago. And yet we have ideas that are valuable to the conversation. We have ideas that I believe if we let iron sharpen iron, we could get to a better answer, a better policy answer. And the pathway to that is to call a special session. Mr. Governor, I ask that you call a special session so that we may directly and conclusively provide property tax relief to the people of Colorado without requiring them to give up the refunds due them under the Taxpayer Bill of Rights that they are properly owed. Mr. President, thank you for the time.
The motion is the repassage of Senate Bill 303. Are there any no votes? Senators Van Winkle, Will, Baisley, Rich, Gardner, Lundin, Smallwood, Kirkmeyer, Liston, Pelton B, Pelton R, Simpson. With a vote of 23 ayes, 12 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused, Senate Bill 303 is repassed. Co-sponsors, Senators Henriksen, message from the House.
May 8, 2023, Mr. President, the House has adopted the first report of the First Conference Committee on Senate Bill 88 is printed in the House Journal May 8, 2023, and as repassed the bill is so amended, the bill is returned herewith. The House has adopted the first report of the First Conference Committee on Senate Bill 271 as printed in House Journal May 8, 2023, and as repassed the bill is so amended, the bill is returned herewith.
Consideration of conference committee reports. Will the clerk please read the title of Senate Bill 88?
Senate Bill 88, Senators Pelton B. and Fields, Representatives Winter T. and Martinez concerning an offender's eligibility for release from confinement.
Senator Fields. Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adopt the first report of the First Conference Committee on Senate Bill 88.
Is there any discussion?
Members,
Senator Fields.
Members, because of the not passing of CCJ Commission, this bill, Senate Bill 688, was to report back on this bill in reference to a sentencing structure. And because CCJ is sunset, we needed to change the reporting date criteria to make sure that we were able to get the outcome that we wanted from this bill. So basically, CCJJ will report before they sunset and have recommendations on who might pick up the rest of the work. So we're asking for an aye vote.
The motion is for the adoption of the first report of the First Conference Committee on Senate Bill 88. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 0 excused, the motion is the first report of the First Conference Committee on Senate Bill 88 is adopted. Senator Pelton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the repassage of Senate Bill 88.
Is there any discussion? Senator Pelton.
Thank you, Mr. President. The good senator from Aurora and I had a long discussion this right before session about this bill and how important it is to both of us. Both of us have had tragedies in our families, and my family member is a police officer, was a police officer at Fort Lupton. He's now in Brighton, but he was shot in the face by a young man who had some issues, and he was sentenced to 96 years. When I asked him how many years that his perpetrator or an assailant would serve, he had no idea. So that's what this bill come from. He said he got 96 years, but he didn't know how much time he would actually serve. So that's why this bill came in fruition. The good senator from Aurora has told us her story a lot, and I appreciate her for helping me with this bill. But that was the reason for this bill. That was the reason because victims have the right to know how much time that their offender is spending behind bars. And I think that should be the victim's prerogative to have that knowledge. So I thank you for making this. I feel like that it's just a little shameful that, or not shameful. I would never use shameful in this chamber, but it just feels a little frustrating to me that we would get rid of the CCJJ at such a time when there's so many reforms that need to happen and so many victims that need to have some solace in what's going on in their lives. So thank you. I ask for an aye vote on Senate Bill 88.
Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank the lead prime sponsor on this bill. We talked over the summer, and he told me his story, and it was similar to mine. My story was that there's 4 offenders that were responsible for murdering my son. And one of them was put in community correction. He was supposed to be given 30 years, and he only did 20% of his time. And so he was put in community correction, and then from community correction, he was released with no further supervision, without notification to me. So of course we had to put together a safety plan because we had no idea. We thought 30 years. He ended up only doing 12. So we wanted to partner to get a sense of what truth is there in sentencing. Because when the jury comes back with a verdict, guilty, and then the judge renders a sentence, then as a crime victim, you believe that there's accountability for the crime that was committed based on the sentencing criteria. Well, that's not true. The reason it's not true is because you get good time. So if you are well behaved in prison, then they shave off time. And then there's other things you can do. You can go to school, you can get diploma, and there's ways that you can reduce your time. And when you reduce your time, it ends up being less than, like in this situation, it was like really, I think the DA told me 18% of their time. So we were just trying to get a sense of that. And we talked to members of the defense bar, and then also from DAs, and they said studies were taking place, that they were already working on this, 2 years of work on this topic. And so instead of us coming up with just a random number, like 80% of the time, they said, allow us to give you some evidence-based rationale behind what would be an appropriate truth in sentence criteria. Well, we don't have that opportunity because the CCJ Commission Task Force is on a sunset. So as a crime victim, we don't know if we're ever going to get to a point that we can have some clarity in reference to the sentencing that an offender receives after being found guilty. It's kind of uncertain. So they're going to tell us, who knows? They'll probably tell us they can't do it anymore. Yeah. Or they'll recommend it maybe to the criminal justice for review. But this is the best we could do in order to get to our answer. The best we could do is tell us what our next move could be. And so we're asking for an aye vote on this bill because we're trying to get to a point where there is better clarity and truth in sentencing. Thank you, members.
The motion is for the repassage of Senate Bill 88. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused, Senate Bill 88 is repassed. Co-sponsors. Senators Gardner, Liston. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Bill 271?
Senate Bill 271, Senators Roberts and Van Winkle, Representatives Kennedy and Snyder, concerning the regulation of compounds that are related to cannabinoids and in connection therewith, making an appropriation.
Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adopt the first report of the First Conference Committee on Senate Bill 271.
Is there any discussion? Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the conference committee this afternoon, we corrected some of the amendments that the House put on. We have lowered the level of THC at which age needs to be checked, so 21 and over. We lowered that from, it left the Senate at 1.75, that got lowered to 1.25. And we also included that labeling needs to happen for all products that are have the age check, and also made a few clarifying amendments to the ratios that are allowed under the bill between non-intoxicating and intoxicating. And with that, I'd ask for an aye vote on the committee report.
Seeing no further discussion, the motion is for the adoption of the first report of the First Conference Committee on Senate Bill 271. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused, the first report of the First Conference Committee on Senate Bill 271 is adopted. Senator Van Winkle.
Mr. President, I ask for the repassage of Senate Bill 271.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the motion is for the repassage of Senate Bill 271. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused, Senate Bill 271 is repassed. Co-sponsors. Third reading of bills. Will the clerk please read the title to House Bill 1220?
House Bill 1220, Representatives Holtorf and Backenfield, Senators Pelton B. and Pelton R., House Bill 1220, Representatives Holtorf and McCormick, Senators Pelton B. and Pelton R. concerning a study regarding the economic impact of the elimination of large-capacity groundwater withdrawal within the Republican River Basin, and in connection therewith requiring the Colorado Water Center to conduct the study and report its findings and conclusions to certain legislative committees and making an appropriation.
Senator Pelton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for final passage of House Bill 1220.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the motion is the passage of House Bill 1220. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused, House Bill 1220 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senators Bridges, Kirkmeyer, Lundin, Roberts, Exum, Hanson, Simpson, Will, Priola, Winter, Cutter, Marchman. Will the clerk please read the title to the final bill? House Bill 1048.
House Bill 1048, Representatives Luck and Basinacre, Senators Pelton R. and Janal, concerning a delineator post on a 2-lane state highway.
Senator Janal.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move House Bill 1048 on third reading and final passage.
Is there any discussion? Really? Nothing?
What? We did it?
Seeing none, the motion is the adoption of House Bill 1048. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused, House Bill 1048 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senators Bridges, Henriksen, Zenzinger, Hanson, Will, Pelton B., Priola, Rodriguez,
Well, I was going to do something. Why, you go ahead.
Okay. Members, we would have adopted the resolution to adjourn. However, the House beat us to it. But either way, I want to say a sincere thank you all for all of your work this session, for the people of Colorado, but most importantly at this moment, this late hour after many late hours over the last week or so, I want to thank our staff. I'm not sure if the enrolling room is listening. Let's make sure the enrolling room hears us and they come out as well. I know you guys are in that little room for way too many hours, but we deeply appreciate the work that you do to make sure this Senate runs well, so thank you. We also want to, of course, thank our assignables. Sadia, you have been amazing once again. And Kitty, thank you so much for joining the Senate family this year. LCS and OLLS always helping us navigate every single day. Thank you. And Frank. And Frank and all of the sergeants. Thank you for keeping us safe and all that you do to keep our Senate running. And that's about it, right? Oh, right, you guys. The front desk staff, the best front desk staff ever. Dave, thank you for your late hours and all of your hard work. Ryan, thanks for jumping in and everything that you've done to keep the Senate running. Zoe, you're the best reader there is. Jema, thank you for all of your hard work with the calendar and the journals and everything. And there's one more person. Ms. Markwell. Cindy has retired from the Senate 12 times. But let's hope this time it's not for real. Thank you, Cindy. You are a rock for this institution. This institution will live forever because of the work that you have done, and it will always live on with integrity, with its roots deeply intact. So thank you for how much you have cared for this institution.
Well, that's anticlimactic.
It is. I know. Just wait, she'll read really fast. Message from the House.
Message from the House.
May 8, 2023, Mr. President, the House has adjourned sine die at 9:45 p.m. on May 8, 2023.
Signing of bills.
Sign of bills.
May 8, 2023, the President has signed Senate Bills 35, 174, 177, 205, 252, 253, 260, 266, 273, 290, House Bill 1032, 1102, 1210, 1218, 1226, 1237, 1274, 1288.
Delivery to the governor.
May 8, 2023, to the Governor for signature on Monday, May 8, 2023 at 9:20 a.m. Senate Bill 2967, 111, 153, 249, 254, 283, and 287.
Majority Leader Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, one last announcement. The Office of Legislative Legal Services would like you to know that their first publication of the year, the much sought-after preliminary digest of bills, will be available online later today. The office is going to tweet about it, so make sure to retweet them. The final digest of bills will be available online and in hard copy shortly after the governor's last day to act on bills, which is June 7th. Members, that concludes the business of the first regular session of the 74th General Assembly. And I move that the Senate adjourn sine die.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? The ayes have it, and the Senate will adjourn sine die.